My name is Natalie Brooks. I am 29, and the night my mom went on X to congratulate me for finally moving out, I was sitting on the floor of my new studio apartment, eating cold takeout straight from the box. I opened the app, and there it was at the top of my feed. Her post already taking off. You should have left earlier anyway. No more feeding a pig. Underneath, the little heart icon was climbing past 1,800 likes. Strangers dropping laughing emojis like they knew anything about me. My aunt jumped in first, commenting about how I cried when Starbucks rejected me at 23. Like that one job interview defined my entire life. My dad added before and after photos. My old bedroom, messy from years of working late nights on my laptop, next to his new man cave with a TV tossed in and my shelves ripped off the wall. My younger sister tagged all her friends and wrote, "Warning, this is your future if you date gamers," even though half the time I was working, not playing. I scrolled through every comment, every joke, every stranger agreeing that I was some lazy adult child who finally stopped leeching off her poor parents. None of them knew that the house they were laughing from was legally mine, that the mortgage had been paid off by my grandmother long before, and that for years I had been quietly transferring money every month to people who never once treated me like an adult. That night, I didn't clap back, didn't write a thread, didn't call anyone. I just hit save on every screenshot, closed the app, and let them enjoy their little victory. If you think that post was just a mean joke, wait until you see what happened when I finally decided to tell the internet the whole story. Stay with me, because one screenshot and one forgotten detail turned their funny post into the most expensive lesson my family has ever learned. I guess to make sense of that night, you need to know how we got there. I grew up in a beige two-story house in Aurora, just outside Denver. The kind of neighborhood where every driveway has the same cracked line down the middle, and every neighbor has seen you mow the lawn in pajamas at least once. My grandmother bought that house long before I was born and paid it off with decades of nursing shifts and double overtime. When I was 22, she passed away, and a few weeks later, we sat in a cramped attorney's office while he read her will. That was the first time I heard my full name said like it meant something important. The house, the one my parents had called our home, my entire life, was left to me. Not to my mom, not to my stepdad, to me. The lawyer even explained why in this slow, careful voice. My grandmother did not trust Gary with money. He had a history of borrowing and never quite paying people back. She loved my mom, but she wanted one person in the family to have something nobody could take away. I remember my mom, Sandra, going pale for a second and then smoothing her face over, like she had decided right there to pretend this was no big deal. Gary laughed it off and said it was all in the family anyway, like paperwork was just decoration. I was 22, grieving the only person who ever told me I was brilliant without adding a but. So I did not argue when my mom suggested that nothing really had to change. They would keep handling the bills. I could stay as long as I needed while I figured out my life, and we would just go on. Then, a few months later, she slid an envelope across the kitchen table and called it a grown-up move. She told me I should start contributing $400 a month toward the house, to help with utilities and groceries and teach me responsibility. On paper, it sounded fair, and I was working part-time as a barista while trying to land a real job, so I agreed. The part nobody said out loud was that I was now paying rent for a house that was legally mine, while the adults who always complained about money lived there for free. Around 23, I had my big failure moment that my Aunt Denise loved to bring up online. I had applied to Starbucks corporate for a junior design-related role, not just a store job, and I made it to the last round. I cared way too much. Stayed up all night redesigning mock-ups, and when the rejection email came, I cried in my car for 15 minutes before my shift. Denise heard the story secondhand and turned it into a running joke. Every Thanksgiving, every birthday, it was, "Remember when Nat cried over Starbucks like they were Harvard?" From then on, anything I tried became a punchline before it had a chance to become real. While the family was laughing, I was teaching myself UX design and social media strategy online. I picked up tiny freelance gigs, building basic websites for local shops, running Instagram pages for people who barely knew how to post. I would sit at my desk in my messy room until 2 in the morning, tweaking wireframes and scheduling campaigns while everyone thought I was gaming. When I mentioned a client call, my mom would say, "So, another pretend job?" Gary would ask if I had applied at the warehouse yet, so I could get a real paycheck. My sister Lily would roll her eyes and tell her friends, right in front of me, that I just stays in her room playing with Canva. Every month, I sent that $400 transfer labeled contribution, while also buying most of my own food, my own clothes, my own equipment. If I ever tried to explain that, legally, I owned the place, Gary would shut it down with, "You live under my roof, you follow my rules." Like the will was some imaginary story I made up to feel special. The longer it went on, the less I talked. It was easier to let them believe I was a lazy homebody than to argue over every invoice, every call, every project. So I built my career quietly, client by client, until one day my income from fake internet work was more than both of my parents' paychecks put together. And still, at dinner, I would hear them complain about adult children leeching off their parents these days, while they sat in the living room my grandmother had left to me, watching a TV I had helped buy, under a roof my name was printed on in county records. That bitterness did not spill out all at once. It just settled in, layer by layer, like dust in the corners of my room, waiting for the day someone finally opened a window and saw how much had built up. The thing about building a life online is that nobody outside your laptop really believes it is happening until it hits them in the face. For a while, my fake internet work, as Gary liked to call it, looked exactly like what they accused me of. Long hours in my room, messy desk, headphones on, dishes stacked on the floor when I was on deadline. But little by little, those tiny gigs turned into retainers. A coffee shop I did a logo for recommended me to their supplier. Then that supplier recommended me to an e-commerce brand. And suddenly, I was redesigning product pages at 2 in the morning while my family complained I was always holed up like a teenager. I went from begging clients to pay me $300 for a full website to charging $1,500 for a UX audit and having them say, "Is that all?" I remember the first month I made more than my mom and Gary combined. I stared at the number in my banking app, then walked into the kitchen and poured myself cereal, while my mom told Lily that nobody wants to work hard anymore. Kids just want to be influencers. They had no idea the girl they thought was playing around on Canva was paying quarterly taxes and setting money aside for retirement. Around that time, I started dating Marcus. We met through a friend of a friend at a barbecue, and he liked that I was creative. He sold trucks at a dealership and wore fitted shirts, and watches he could not really afford. On our third date, when he asked where I lived, I told him, "I live with my parents in Aurora," and watched his face do that quick flicker before he forced a smile. I did not add that the deed was in my name. It sounded unbelievable even to me sometimes, like I was bragging. When he came over the first time, my mom put on her nice voice and asked him 100 questions about his job. Gary joked that maybe Marcus could talk some sense into me and get me to apply at the warehouse. Lily rolled her eyes and told him, "She's been trying to be a designer for years, it's cute." I laughed it off, changed the subject, and later apologized to Marcus for the circus. He shrugged and said, "Families are families," but there was a weird tension any time the subject of where I lived came up. As my client list grew and my savings account climbed, the comments at home only got sharper. If I worked late, my mom would say she was so tired of cooking for a grown child who doesn't even leave the house. If I made my own food, she complained I was eating separate like a stranger. Gary loved to complain about utilities, saying my computers must be running the bill up, then turn around and blast the TV all night. Every month, $400 left my account to help out, and every month at least one of them made a joke about how generous they were for letting me stay. I started tracking everything, partly because I needed it for taxes, partly because it was the only way to stay sane. I had spreadsheets for client invoices, income projections, what I spent on software and gear, and one quiet tab labeled House, where I added up every contribution payment since I was 22. One night, after a fight where my mom called me ungrateful for not emptying the dishwasher fast enough, I sat on my bed and looked at that number at the bottom of the column. It was tens of thousands of dollars. For a house my grandmother had died to pay off, the house my parents were trashing my work from. That was the first time my anger felt bigger than my guilt. The second time was when Marcus and I had been dating a little over a year, and the topic of moving in together came up. He said his lease was ending and he did not want to keep telling people his girlfriend lived with her parents. He suggested we find an apartment together downtown. I told him I was already helping with the house and that if he wanted, we could talk about him moving into the spare room for a while to save money. He looked at me like I had said something disgusting. "I am not moving in with your parents," he said. "That is not normal, Nat." I told him quietly that the house was actually mine legally, that my grandmother had left it to me, and that my parents were the ones living there without paying rent. He laughed. He honestly thought I was joking. "If it's your house, why are you paying them rent?" he asked. "Why does your mom act like she's doing you a favor?" I did not have a good answer, because any answer I gave sounded like an excuse for letting myself be treated like a child. 2 weeks later, after a fight where he accused me of choosing comfort over growing up, Marcus broke up with me in the parking lot of a Chili's. He said he could not build a future with someone still stuck in their parents' house, then got into his car and drove off. I stood under the fluorescent lights thinking about the irony that I owned a whole house and somehow still looked like a dependent from the outside. On the drive home, I made a decision. I was done letting other people define what my life looked like. Back in my room, I opened my laptop, pulled up my spreadsheets, and called a mortgage advisor. When she saw my income and savings, she sounded almost impressed. We talked about condos near downtown Denver, neighborhoods with coffee shops and co-working spaces where my work would not be the punchline of a joke. Within a few months, after a blur of viewings, paperwork, and digital signatures, I had an accepted offer on a small studio with big windows and a view of the city lights. I did not tell my family a word until everything was final. On the day of closing, I signed the last document on a little tablet, got handed a key, and drove over alone. I stood in the empty space listening to the echo of my footsteps, and for the first time in years the quiet felt like freedom, not failure. That night I drove back to Aurora knowing I was no longer trapped. I packed my things in labeled boxes, stacked them by the door, and circled a date on my calendar for the move. My mom still complained about feeding a grown child. Gary still told people I was playing on the computer. Lily still joked about me being a gamer. But every time they said it, it bounced off something solid inside me. I was done renting my own life from people who refused to see it. I had a new address waiting, and soon I was going to leave that house exactly the way my grandmother intended, with me in control, and everyone else forced to deal with what that really meant. Moving day did not feel dramatic at first. It just felt like a Saturday, where everyone woke up already annoyed at each other. I had been packing quietly all week, folding my life into cardboard boxes in the corner of my room, while my mom complained about tripping over them and Gary grumbled about clutter. That morning, I came downstairs with my keys hooked on my finger and told them, as calmly as I could, that the movers would be there in an hour and I would be out by tonight. My mom stared at me like I had just announced I was joining a cult. Out where? She asked. I told her I had bought a place closer to downtown, a small studio. Nothing crazy, but mine. She blinked a couple of times and then laughed. This light, disbelieving laugh that made my skin crawl. With what money, Natalie? You don't even have a real job. Gary chimed in from the couch without looking away from the TV, saying it was about time. I learned what real bills felt like, and that I would be crawling back once rent and heat hit me at the same time. Lily walked in halfway through, holding her phone, and said, "You are actually moving. You're not just threatening, like, with actual movers." I nodded, and she shrugged, already half amused, like she could not wait to tell her friends. When the moving truck pulled up, there was this weird shuffle of bodies at the door, everyone pretending they didn't want to watch but unable to look away. The movers carried out box after box, my monitors, my chair, the little things I had bought with money they pretended did not exist. My mom kept making comments under her breath about how I better remember who fed me all these years. Gary joked loudly about turning my room into something useful for once, maybe a home gym or a game room for himself. Nobody said they would miss me. Nobody asked for my new address. I did one last walk through my room, fingers brushing the wall where my grandmother used to lean when she came in to say goodnight, and then I walked out with my backpack and a laundry bag slung over my shoulder. No big speech, no dramatic exit, just a tired goodbye to a house that never really felt like mine, even though my name was on the deed. The drive to my new place took 25 minutes, but it felt like crossing a border. The studio was still mostly empty when I got there, just my mattress on the floor, a couple of boxes, my laptop, and the city outside the window. I set my phone on the counter, ordered cheap Chinese food, and spent an hour putting together a wobbly Target table while some streaming show played in the background. For the first time in years, the silence around me did not feel like judgment. It felt like a reset. It was only after I had eaten half my lo mein straight from the carton that I picked up my phone again. It had a little red dot that would not go away. At the top of my feed was my mom's post, a picture of an empty plate and a wine glass with the caption, "Cheers to finally not feeding a grown child anymore. You should have left earlier, haha. No more feeding a pig." Underneath were hundreds of likes piling up by the minute, people I did not know replying with laughing emojis and mood and same. A few swipes down, my Aunt Denise had replied, "Remember when she cried at 23 because Starbucks rejected her still unemployed in her late 20s? Some people never learn." Gary had quote tweeted it with a side-by-side collage he'd made. My old room the week before, boxes and clothes everywhere because I was packing and working at the same time, versus the same room now with my desk ripped out, a cheap recliner in the corner, and a big flat screen on the wall. He captioned it, "From disaster zone to man cave in one day. Guess we finally got our house back." Lily had tagged half her contact list and written, "Warning, this is your future if you date gamers," like my entire career could be reduced to a joke about video games. I recognized the names of neighbors, old classmates, and even a couple of moms from my high school PTA liking and laughing along. One notification caught my eye more than the others. Marcus had liked my mom's post. No comment, no message to me, just a quiet little heart, as if to say he agreed that I was the problem and leaving was the punchline. For a second, my chest went hot and my throat tight, like I had been caught naked in front of the entire town. Then something sharper cut through it. All these people were laughing about how I had finally moved out, acting like my parents were doing me some favor by letting me go, and not one of them knew that for years I had been paying $400 a month to live in my own house while they lived there for free. None of them knew that my grandmother had signed that place over to me specifically so Gary could not borrow against it or lose it. None of them knew I was sitting in a condo I had bought on my own income from the same fake internet work they thought made me a joke. I scrolled back to the top of the thread, took a slow breath, and started saving. Screenshot of the original post. Screenshot of Denise's Starbucks joke. Screenshot of Gary's man cave collage. Screenshot of Lily's future if you date gamers warning. I captured the likes, the usernames, the timestamps, every small detail. Then I closed X and opened my banking app, flipping through years of $400 transfers labeled house money and my scanned copy of my grandmother's will sitting in my cloud storage. I had receipts stacked on receipts. I could have replied right then, dropped everything in a quote tweet, and watched their little party burn down in real time. My fingers even hovered over the reply box for a moment. But anger is one thing, strategy is another. Instead of typing, I set a reminder on my phone for 12 days from that night. Then I put my phone face down on the floor next to my mattress, lay back, and stared at the ceiling. Let them enjoy their joke, I thought. Let them think they finally got rid of the pig. When I answered, it was not going to be in a comment thread. It was going to be in a way they could not laugh off or pretend they never said. 12 days sounds random, but it was just long enough for the noise around my mom's post to settle into something uglier. At first, people were just laughing along, throwing in their little same comments and pig emojis. By day 12, it had become one of those local in-jokes. People in town I barely remembered from high school were quoting it when they complained about their own kids. My mom had even pinned the post to her profile. That morning, my reminder went off on my phone while I was making coffee in my tiny kitchen. I stared at the notification for a second, then opened X. Her post was still there, still pinned, still full of strangers who thought they knew my entire life from a caption about feeding a pig. I scrolled through it one more time, not to hurt myself, but to make sure I had every angle covered. Then I opened my laptop and started building my own thread. I did not start with a rant. I started with facts. The first image was a clean cropped screenshot of my mom's post. Same caption, same likes, same pile of laughing faces. Under it, I wrote in plain text that this was my mother celebrating that her 29-year-old daughter had finally moved out after years of freeloading. The next image was a scan of my grandmother's will, with all the sensitive information blacked out except for one line. The one where my full name was written next to the words, sole beneficiary of the property located at, followed by the Aurora address. I highlighted it in yellow before exporting the file. Under that, I wrote that my grandmother had paid off that house with decades of nursing shifts, and that she had left it to me on purpose, because she did not trust my stepdad with money. Then I added a screenshot from my banking app, carefully edited to hide account numbers, showing 8 years of monthly transfers labeled house money. $400 every month, adding up to tens of thousands of dollars I had contributed while living in the home I legally owned. After that came a screenshot of my client dashboard, with names blurred but numbers visible, showing my yearly income as a freelance UX designer and social media strategist. It wasn't bragging, it was proof that I was not, and had never been, the unemployed leech my family had painted me as. I wrote a caption that tied it all together. Nothing fancy, just the truth arranged in a way people could not ignore. I explained that the pig in my mother's joke had bought her own condo in Denver with money she earned from the same fake internet job they mocked. I explained that the room my dad turned into a man cave overnight was in a house he had never paid a mortgage on. I ended with a simple line. If you are going to drag your own kid on the internet for clout, at least make sure they are not the one who owns the roof over your head. Before I hit post, I sat there for a minute with my finger hovering above the trackpad. I knew once it was out, there was no taking it back. I thought about my grandmother, about how angry she would be if she saw the way they talked about me using the house she worked herself sick to leave. I thought about every time my mom had rolled her eyes at my work, every time Gary had thrown my house, my rules in my face, every time Lily had laughed about me to her friends like I wasn't standing right there. Then I thought about all the people who felt trapped in similar situations, dismissed because their work did not look traditional enough for their parents to respect. I hit post. For a while, nothing happened. A few of my own followers liked it. A couple of mutuals replied with "holy shit" and "I am so sorry," and I went back to answering emails. Then a small account that shares freelancer horror stories quote tweeted it with, "This is why so many of us move in silence." That pulled in another audience. A women in tech community saw it next and added their own quote tweet about respecting daughters. A local Denver meme page grabbed the screenshots and posted them with a caption about Colorado parents thinking their kids' online work isn't real. My notifications turned into a slot machine. My phone buzzed until it slid off the table. Comments poured in from strangers who sounded a lot like me, people who had been told their art or coding or content wasn't real work, while they quietly paid the bills. Some were mad on my behalf. Others were just grateful someone had put words to a situation they were in, too. And then, of course, it found its way back home. I didn't need to see the moment my mom discovered it to know it had happened. First came a text. "Call me right now." Then another. "This is not funny, Natalie." Then a missed call. Then 3 more. Then a voicemail I did not listen to. Gary's number popped up next, followed by a text that said we needed to handle this like adults, and that I was making the family look bad. Lily sent a string of messages that started with, "What are you doing?" and shifted quickly into, "You are taking this way too far," and "We are family. You don't air everything out online." Denise, of course, had to call and leave a lecture about how my grandmother, never meant for this kind of drama, conveniently ignoring the fact that she had been making the Starbucks story into circus material for years. I put my phone on silent and watched the little unread numbers climb. Every time they sent a new message, my thread picked up another wave of shares. Someone who lived 2 streets over replied that they had always thought my mom's post was mean, but didn't know the story. A girl I went to high school with said she was not surprised, and that my mom had always liked attention more than accuracy. A couple of people pointed out that if my parents were this comfortable humiliating me in public, it probably wasn't the first time. It did not take long before people started putting the pieces together. They clicked through to my mom's profile, saw her pinned post, and realized it was the same one I had in my thread. They saw Gary's man cave tweet and his proud "our house" wording. They saw Lily's warning about dating gamers. Screenshots of their posts started circulating in replies that did not belong to me. For years, my family had talked as if they owned the narrative because they owned the louder voices at the dinner table. In a few hours, the balance flipped. Now they were the ones being dissected by strangers, the ones people judged from a distance. I do not think public humiliation is always the answer. I still felt a twisting guilt in my stomach as I watched it unfold, but I also could not ignore the ugly satisfaction of seeing people finally call out what I had been living with since I was 22. And the thing is, at that point, all I had done was tell the truth about money and ownership. I had not mentioned every cruel comment. I had not brought up every time they used my work as a punchline. I had not even touched the biggest card I was holding, the fact that if I wanted to, I could walk into a county office and legally make them tenants instead of hosts. The post was just the first push. The real consequences, the ones that would change everything, were still on their way. The fallout started faster than I expected. 2 days after my thread went up, I woke up to 3 missed calls from my mom and a text from Lily that just said, "You need to answer them. This is blowing up." When I finally checked my notifications, I saw why. Someone had screenshotted my thread and posted it in a local Denver Facebook group. From there, it jumped into a neighborhood app and then into a private chat one of my mom's coworkers ran. Patients at the dental office where she worked had started recognizing her from X. One woman apparently walked up to the front desk, looked at her, and said, "So you are the mom who called her own daughter a pig online," right in front of a full waiting room. Sandra called me after that, sobbing and furious at the same time, saying I had ruined her life over one joke. At Gary's job in the warehouse, a coworker showed the man cave tweet to their supervisor. It wasn't that he broke some official rule, but suddenly all of the jokes about my house and his constant borrowing made more sense to people. A couple of guys he owed money to started asking loudly about when he would be paying them back, now that the internet knew he was living rent-free in a house he did not own. His boss called him into the office and told him, as politely as possible, that the company did not love being dragged into family drama on social media, and that maybe it was time for him to take a step back. Within a week, his hours were cut. The quarterly bonus he had been counting on to catch up on credit card bills evaporated. Lily was not spared either. She worked in HR at a logistics company that liked to talk about culture a lot. One of her coworkers stumbled on my thread, recognized the last name, and sent it to their boss. Lily told me later that she had to sit in a conference room while her manager asked why her name was attached to a tweet, mocking people who play games, and to a dog pile on her sister. She got a formal warning in her file for unprofessional public conduct. Suddenly, the jokes were not so funny anymore. It was around then that I made my next move. I printed out a copy of my grandmother's will, highlighted the part about the house, and pulled my house money spreadsheet into a neat little packet. Then I called the county office to confirm, in simple terms, what I already knew. The deed was in my name alone. I asked what it would take to sell. They told me. It was less complicated than I had built it up to be in my head. After that, I scheduled a meeting with a real estate agent for evaluation. I did not tell my family any of this yet. Instead, I sent them an email. It was short and dry, the kind of thing you would expect from a landlord, not a daughter. I explained that as the legal owner of the Aurora property, I had two options going forward. One, we could formalize a rental agreement. That would mean Gary and my mom paying market rent, signing an actual lease, and taking over all utilities and responsibilities for the home. Two, I could put the house on the market and they would need to vacate by a certain date. I gave them 30 days to respond, and I copied the attachment showing the deed with my name. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing. My mom called first, angry and hurt, asking how I could do this to them after everything they did for me. Gary sent a message saying that if I thought I could just evict them like strangers, I was out of my mind. Lily, interestingly, texted something different. Can we please talk in person where they cannot perform? I agreed to one meeting. We ended up at a bland chain restaurant off the highway, the kind with sticky menus and fluorescent lights. They were already seated when I walked in, my mother's eyes red, Gary's jaw set, Lily staring down at her water glass. For a minute, nobody spoke. Then my mom launched into a speech about sacrifice, about how she had worked so hard to raise me, about how the internet did not need to know our business. Every few sentences, she circled back to that post, insisting it was just a joke, that she had been venting and never meant for it to get so big. Gary interrupted her to lecture me about loyalty and keeping problems in the family, as if I had not spent 7 years trying to do exactly that. When they finally ran out of steam long enough for me to speak, I didn't yell. I laid my folder on the table, opened it to the highlighted line in the will, and slid it toward them. I reminded them, calmly, that this house had been left to me by a woman who did trust me to be responsible with it. I pointed out that for 8 years I had paid $400 every month to live there, on top of my own expenses, while they lived rent-free. I told them that if we were going to talk about doing things to family, maybe we should start there. Lily spoke up then, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. She admitted she had known about the will but never really thought about what it meant, that she had joined in on the jokes because it was easier than being the only one defending me. She said she had deleted her comments and locked her profile after my thread blew up. For the first time, she said, "I am sorry," in a way that did not sound defensive. My mom sniffed and said that did not erase the humiliation she felt at work. Gary muttered that men at the warehouse would never let him live this down. I shrugged and told them the truth. The humiliation they were feeling now was just a tiny fraction of what it felt like to be painted as a lazy freeloader in front of hundreds of people when I had been carrying more weight than they ever admitted. I reminded them that I had not revealed anything they had not proudly posted themselves. Then I brought it back to the practical. I told them my decision was made. I was not going to be their invisible landlord, quietly paying for everything while they mocked me. They had 30 days to decide whether they wanted to sign a real lease at a fair market rate or move out so I could sell the house. My mom started crying again, saying they could not afford full rent now that Gary's hours were cut. Gary tried to bluff, saying they would find some way to fight it in court, but the way his eyes flicked down to the highlighted will told me he knew he had no ground. Lily wiped her face and asked if I would really sell the house my grandmother had loved so much. That question hurt more than I expected. I told her I had thought about it a lot. Keeping the house the way things were felt like a second funeral for my own future. Selling it, using that money to build the business my grandmother always encouraged, felt more like honoring her than letting her hard work fund my parents' ego. The conversation went in circles for another hour, my parents bargaining and guilt-tripping and accusing, trying every tactic they had used on me since I was a teenager. In the end, nothing they said changed the math. When the 30 days were up, they had not come up with a lease agreement or a plan to afford rent. They packed their things into borrowed trucks and moved into a small rental farther out, one they could actually afford on Sandra's now reduced income and whatever work Gary could scrape together. I signed the listing agreement with my agent the next day. A few weeks later, after open houses and offers, I sat in another cramped office, signed another stack of papers, and watched as the number from the sale hit my account. It was more money than I had ever seen in one place. Years of my grandmother's labor and my own finally converted into something I could steer. I walked out into the Colorado sun feeling like I had finally stepped out of a story someone else had written for me. The house was gone, but so was the version of me who stayed quiet while everyone else laughed. What I did with that money, and what happened to my family after, would end up being the part people argued about the most. But for the first time, the next chapter was going to be on my terms. I did not go out and buy a sports car or a pile of designer bags with the money from the sale. The first thing I bought was a heavy wooden desk that did not wobble when I typed. I set it by the window in my Denver condo and turned that corner into my command center. Then I rented a small office downtown. Nothing fancy. Just 2 rooms above a nail salon with good light and cheap rent, and I put my name on the door. Brooks Studio. It felt surreal the first time a client came up the stairs and shook my hand in person, looked around at the framed mock-ups on the wall, and said, "So this is where the magic happens." For years, I had been doing the same work from a bedroom people called messy. Now it finally looked like what it always was. Real. With the cushion from the house sale, I could say no to clients who treated me badly. I could bring on a part-time assistant, a college kid whose own parents thought graphic design was a hobby. I paid her fairly, put her name on projects, and made sure she never had to apologize for working from a laptop. The story of what happened with my family did not stay contained to X. Someone posted a summary on Reddit. It made its way into a few TikTok videos, and I would occasionally hear my own words paraphrased in podcasts or group chats. I watched people argue about whether I had gone too far, whether selling the house was justified, whether calling out your parents online was ever okay. Every time it resurfaced, my follower count bumped up, and a fresh batch of messages landed in my inbox. Some were angry, usually from people who sounded a lot like my mom. Others were from daughters and sons who had grown up hearing the same jokes about being lazy, ungrateful, or still at home, even while they quietly kept everything afloat. I answered as many as I could without turning my whole life into customer service for other people's pain. I told them what I wish someone had told me at 22, that you are allowed to set boundaries with family, that they gave you life is not a blank check for them to spend your self-respect, and that work that happens on a screen is still work. My own family did not disappear. Sandra and Gary ended up in a cramped two-bedroom in a cheaper suburb. Gary bounced between temp jobs for a while before settling into night shifts driving deliveries. My mom kept her position at the dental office but never got back the extra hours she lost. The waiting room whispers faded eventually, but the bruise to her pride lingered. For a long time, she and I barely spoke. Birthdays passed with nothing more than a short text or a forwarded meme. It would be easy to say that felt good, that cutting them off was clean. But the truth is, grief is messy even when you are the one who packed the boxes. Sometimes I miss the version of my mom who used to braid my hair before school, the version of my stepdad who grilled in the backyard on summer evenings. But missing who people used to be does not mean you owe your current self to who they are now. Lily was the first bridge back. She came to see my studio one afternoon, nervous and quiet, and stood in the doorway looking at my workspace like she had walked into another universe. She apologized again, not just for the tweet, but for every time she had joined in to avoid being the odd one out. She said my thread had forced her to look at herself the way strangers did for the first time. We are not best friends now, but we talk. She sends me job postings that might fit my clients. I send her articles about workplace boundaries. It is small, but it is real. The rest of my family still believes I overreacted. Maybe they always will. I have stopped trying to convince them otherwise. I did not tell this story so the internet would cheer when my parents struggle to pay rent. I told it because for years I let their version of me be the only one anyone heard, even in my own head. Calling them out publicly was not about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about putting the truth next to the punchline and letting people decide which one mattered more. The lesson is not that you should drag your family online the first time they hurt your feelings. The lesson is that there is a cost to humiliation, especially when it comes from the people who are supposed to protect you. There is a cost to treating your child's work like a joke because it does not look like your job. There is a cost to years of small cuts, rolled eyes, and just kidding insults. One day the kid you call lazy might be the one signing the papers that decide where you sleep. If you are listening to this and you see yourself in me, I hope you hear this part the loudest. You are not wrong for wanting respect in your own home. You are not dramatic for feeling hurt when the people closest to you turn your life into content. There is a difference between forgiveness and pretending things never happened. You can love your family and still say, "This is as close as you get to me from now on." That is not betrayal. That is self-respect. My mom's post on X was supposed to be the punchline of my adulthood. Instead, it became the beginning of a different story. One where I stopped playing the role of the ungrateful child and started acting like the owner of my own life. The internet did not fix my family. It did not make everything fair, but it did something important. It forced the people who were so proud to publicly shame me to sit for once in the full light of what they had done. And for me, That was enough to finally move on without looking back at the house I left behind.